Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. This is a JRPG channel. I'm sorry if that's a shock to some of you. I know I hide it well. And while there's been a lot of debate over the years about what constitutes a JRPG, there has been some agreement on general criteria. There's typically a party of characters battling enemies, stats are pretty important, story is usually key. Not every JRPG ticks every box, but if it ticks enough of them, then sure, it's a JRPG. But I want to talk about some games that definitely aren't JRPGs today. Except they totally absolutely are. These are games that may not tick enough boxes for the wider JRPG audience to accept them as such, but I don't care. I'm making a case for them as JRPGs. One point of clarity, this is not going to include games that are obviously JRPGs but aren't made in Japan. That's an argument I'm taking a break from. Everyone out there who thinks JRPGs can only come from Japan can continue thinking that way, while they enjoy their French toast and German chocolate cake and champagne from a vineyard in California. Whew, yeah, I guess I'm itching for a fight today. So on with the video. To the Moon is a heartbreaking story about an old man on his deathbed and the scientists tasked with altering his memories to make his dreams come true. Well, true, in big air quotes. This is an indie title that's gotten a lot of love over the years, and rightly so. It's an incredibly beautiful game, from the whole 16-bit Chrono Trigger aesthetic to the music to the story. It's gorgeous. It's also, depending on how you look at it, a JRPG. How can I say that when there's not even any combat? There's no way to actually lose the game. I mean, that's 100% true and 100% beside the point. I don't want to be pedantic, but if we're having a conversation about the finer nuances of a term as it applies to electronic entertainment, then I guess I need to be pedantic. JRPG stands for Japanese role-playing game. In To the Moon, you play the role of a pair of scientists who have to change a dying man's memory so that he believes, as he passes away, that he actually flew to the moon like he dreamed of doing. Also, it is a game. Yes, even though you can't really lose it, I still think it's a game. The look and feel are closely modeled after some of the most beloved classics of the 16-bit era of JRPGs. So to me, if it looks like a JRPG, sounds like a JRPG, and feels like a JRPG, then it's a JRPG. Feel differently? Let me know down below. Whoa, a Castlevania game on this list? That's crazy. I mean, no, not really. If there's one non-JRPG that's frequently talked about like this, it's Castlevania, particularly Symphony of the Night. But this one sort of approaches its JRPG-ness from the complete opposite angle of a game like To the Moon. In Castlevania Symphony of the Night, you play as Alucard, the son of Dracula. And you have to explore an enormous castle from a 2D perspective, and there's a ton of platforming to do and monsters to kill, and it's a freaking classic. Even if you aren't super into Metroidvanias as a genre, it's still worth checking this game out because it's the definitive example of the art form. Now, exactly how is Castlevania Symphony of the Night a JRPG? Well, because it has stats. Like, that's almost kind of it, right? You gain experience points as you kill monsters, you level up, you find new equipment throughout the castle that raises your stats and gives you special abilities. Do you see how that's like just the opposite of To the Moon? To the Moon has all the other more aesthetic JRPG things down, but it doesn't have combat. Symphony of the Night is an action platformer, but it has JRPG-ish stats. So does Symphony of the Night deserve to be called a JRPG more than To the Moon? I'm not convinced it does, but I am convinced they're both equally worthy of the title. In a lot of ways, JRPG is a term we use to inform someone about what sort of content they should expect from a game. By qualifying the term, like saying Symphony of the Night has JRPG elements, or To the Moon looks and plays like a JRPG without combat, we're communicating something important about the essence of the game. It doesn't fully define it, but it doesn't need to. Symphony of the Night is made even better by its JRPG elements. Most games are improved by copying aspects from JRPGs in my mind. That's a testament to just how freaking incredible JRPGs are. Stardew Valley is a farming sim created by a single developer, Concerned Ape. I don't I don't think that's his real name. I think that's a pseudonym. But I guess we'll never know. Anyway, he created Stardew Valley in the same vein as the classic series Harvest Moon. Now, I could put Harvest Moon on a list like this just as easily as Stardew Valley. But why is that? Even though Harvest Moon is definitely a Japanese game, and it definitely looks like your standard JRPG, it, much like To the Moon, doesn't really have much in the way of combat. That's actually one area where Stardew Valley makes an even stronger case than Harvest Moon for the JRPG label. There is combat in Stardew, even if it's not super involved. Stardew Valley feels like a JRPG to me for several reasons. One, of course, is the visual aesthetic. That top-down-ish, three-quarter whatever view that 16-bit JRPGs all had, it's fully ingrained in my soul at this point. Any game that looks like that is going to have a huge head start in feeling like a JRPG to me. And I imagine that's the case with a lot of you too. Even though the plot isn't super central, you still spend a great deal of time in the game meeting characters and forming relationships with them. It's not a full-on dating sim or anything, but you can bring a cute NPC pizza every day until they marry you, and that's something real life could stand to learn from. Keeping track of your farm has almost become a sort of JRPG-like mechanic over the years, due in large part to Harvest Moon, but it shows up in a lot of games like Harvestella and Rune Factory, so it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation. But the existence of farming elements makes a game feel JRPG-ish now. JRPGs are always creating new mechanics that get adopted by other genres, which is yet another reason I think JRPGs are the friggin' best. The Yakuza series, at least Yakuza 0 through Yakuza 6, are action games that take place in Japan and involve you taking the role of a former Yakuza and beating the crap out of bad guys. On your off days, you can sing karaoke, run a nightclub, and do a whole bunch of other crazy random stuff. They're also extremely JRPGs. Running around the city, you'll even find yourself getting into random battles. Gangs of dudes will just jump at you out of nowhere and you have to fight them. Yeah, that's right, this action series took what many people consider to be the worst part of so many JRPGs and actually made it a ton of fun. It also has some incredibly deep and moving stories, which is another JRPG staple, naturally. This one has the developer's finger on the scale as far as its definition as a JRPG goes, since they fully embrace the genre starting with Part 7 like a dragon. Now, rather than a straight-up action game with JRPG elements, it's just a JRPG. Like, you have battles and they're turn-based, and you can summon a bunch of crabs to attack a guy. You can just jump in with Like a Dragon. You'll miss a few little nods to the previous games, but it's not going to ruin anything for you. But if you're up for a longer ride, every Yakuza game will be, I'm sure, worth your time. Corpse Party is, like To the Moon, a game that started life as an RPG Maker project. So that's a slam dunk, right? It was made in freaking RPG Maker, so how could anyone argue it's not a JRPG? Well, they'd probably pull from the same playbook as earlier because once again, you're not really dealing with combat. Corpse Party is a story of a bunch of kids and their teacher who get pulled into an evil dimension ruled by a crazy little ghost girl who likes killing people in horrible ways. It's very cute and chibi, but also there's a lot of blood and, stuff. It's gross. But also it's incredible. It's one of those Japanese series that starts out really cool and mysterious and then gets less so as it goes on, as the developers start explaining the lore and it ends up getting really convoluted and weird in the later titles. But I love it even at its weirdest and most convoluted. At its core, it's really more of an adventure game done in a JRPG style, where gameplay is about trying to figure out how to move the story forward. There are some minor chase elements where you have to avoid getting caught, but those are thrown in just to keep things fresh on occasion. By and large, you're going to be there to experience the story and watch these characters die in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Also, there was an anime OVA adaptation of Corpse Party, and the ending of that is one of the most haunting and horrifying things I've ever seen. Not super related, but just thought I'd throw that out there for any horror fans. Oh boy, this is the queen mommy of JRPGs that aren't JRPGs, but are JRPGs. Zelda is the game that confused your mom when you first started trying to explain to her what these JRPGs were that you like so much. She walks by one day and sees you playing Zelda and she says, "Oh, so is this a JRPG too?" And you probably roll your eyes and are like, "No, Mom, this is Zelda. It's an action-adventure game set in a fantasy world full of elves that aren't called elves." And then she shrugs and walks away and immediately forgets that conversation ever happened. But look, you and your mom are both right, because the Legend of Zelda series is most definitely an action-adventure series with a focus on combat and puzzle solving. However, it's also most definitely a JRPG. Many of the games in the series, especially the older ones, look and feel so much like JRPGs that it's easy to imagine that hypothetical situation with your mom actually happening, right? And while the combat is all action-based, there are plenty of JRPGs that have action-based combat. What's so different about Zelda? Well, you might say there aren't any stats. You don't level up. To which I would say, so what? Sure, you don't see an HP number flash over an enemy's head when you hit them, but they do have hit points. Those hit points are reduced at different rates depending on what weapon you have equipped. You can cast magic, but only if you have enough magic points, enough magic power in your magic meter, which is a goofy and arbitrary distinction, but sure. And yeah, the focus on puzzle solving might not strike you as the most JRPG-ish in history, but what about a game like Lufia 2? Ever taken a look at the puzzles in that game? Some of them make most Zelda games look as complicated as combat on the Atari 2600. The look, even a lot of the feel of Zelda is JRPG influenced, or maybe it's just as accurate to say that the look and feel of Zelda influenced the broader JRPG landscape. As one of the console pioneers, Zelda set the tone for what a lot of people expected in epic fantasy games. So I think it's perfectly fine to think of Zelda as a JRPG. Just, don't make a video making a claim like that or you're gonna have a bunch of people jumping down your throat. Speaking of which, please let me know what you think about all these down in the comments. And if there are any other games you think would fit the bill, let me know that too. I might want to explore this topic a bit more in the future if I'm interested in causing myself a great deal of pain. So any contributions you might have would be super appreciated. Also, if you like this video, would you, like this video? And let me ask, if you've watched multiple of my videos but haven't subscribed, would you consider subscribing? I don't want you to do it just because. I really want you to subscribe if you think you're likely to watch more of my stuff. I hope you do. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, bye.